think it's good.
Setting up, so you're saying.
It says live on my end.
Oh, okay. I'm still not seeing myself live. It's redirecting. Hi, everyone. It's it's Angelica Allen here. Is it gonna going, I think the video is going from me and you, or not us on the same.
Oh, you have to make it gallery view? Then it should be good.
Yeah. And how will I be able to do that while I'm live?
Okay, are you on Zoom or are you on YouTube?
So I'm on both.
So go to Zoom, since you're
Yeah.
broadcasting through Zoom, and you can just click on the three dots, or no, view in the right upper hand corner, and then you can do view and do gallery view instead of speaker. See when you're in a Zoom window, upper right hand corner.
The only thing is that window is gone. The Zoom window. I'm having to go back onto.
Why don't you stop the live and then we'll set it up again.
Okay. Let's do that. Let me just try one more thing here.
Mm-hmm.
Gallery view. Okay. Can you see now?
Yeah, I can see you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Sorry about this. Technical issues. It's Angelica here. Angelica Allen. I am a health and wellness coach, and I am very excited to be with Lena Levinsky here today. Lena is a speech language pathologist, and she's a host and founder of the Accented World podcast, which was created by her with the intention to inspiring the immigrant community to dream big. Now, as an immigrant myself, her cause is very close to my heart. And in addition to that, Lena has gone through a beautiful inner healing journey that I would love her to share with us. Hi, Lena, how are you?
Hi, wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being patient with my technical issues and guiding me through it.
Like, I never had technical issues myself. They happen all the time. Don't worry. I feel you. It's fine.
So tell us a little bit more about, your story and how you got here.
So you mean
a little bit about like your upbringing and
okay.
Yes, and how you got to the States and
Yes.
Why you founded your podcast.
Okay. So I was born and raised in Poland, in a small town in northeast Poland. And my parents actually traveled quite often to the United States as I was growing up for work. They tried to have a few businesses back at home, but they just weren't working. So my parents, because we have a huge family history of my grandparents having been in the United States, all of them. So they were citizens. So my parents started to come here as well for work. And then eventually, when we got our papers, our green card, they decided, they didn't want the family to be split up anymore. So they moved all of us to the United States. And that happened when I was around 15 years old. So at that point, I didn't really speak too much English. Like I spoke what I knew from school, from having like maybe 3 hours a week or so of English, and then extra tutoring because my parents knew we were going to be moving eventually. So they invested trying to get us more prepared. But, it's still really not enough when you move to another country and are expected to speak the language and understand it fully and go to school in that language. So it was quite a shock for me. And so they moved us to New York, and I went to school in Queens. So you can imagine my shock when I went from this little tiny town in Poland where everybody is Catholic and white and looks like me.
Wow.
And then I come here and it's just like incredible. The whole world is here. So it was a total blessing in disguise. But I was at first, pretty nervous and pretty shocked
Yeah.
at everything because I didn't understand the culture. I didn't understand the language. I didn't have any friends. They moved us we had this gorgeous house in Poland into this small apartment in New York City. So it
Wow.
was quite an adjustment for me.
Yeah.
And I remember it took me quite a while to come to terms with it, just because I was at the age where, me and my friends, we were
Yes.
starting to go out and have fun. And I started to be interested in boys and all these things. And then all of a sudden my parents take me and move me here, where I'm still in New York. So it was quite devastating, but I think it was the best thing that could have happened to me, because coming to the United States and going to school in Queens, I went to a school where nobody spoke my language. Nobody spoke Polish
Yeah.
until about my third year in school, where I met a gym teacher who was from Poland. But because of it, I was forced to speak English. I
Yeah.
was forced to speak English, think in English, do everything in English for about 8 hours or 9 hours a day, because, I couldn't thrive. I couldn't go to school and speak Polish. So because of it, I learned English very quickly. And I modified my accent without really realizing it at the time. It was kind of like second nature to me because I wanted to be like my friends. I was at that age where I was hugely influenced by
Yeah.
everything around me, right? And you want to fit in, especially coming from another country where
Definitely.
people can tell, like, oh,
Yeah.
you're weird. Like, you're not from here. Where are you from? What's your story? And you always stick out. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to stick out. So I was like, okay, well, I want to speak like my friends. So I made myself start to speak like my friends without really consciously knowing what I was doing at the time. Um, but this allowed me to, I went to college, and then I found out about speech language pathology through actually my Spanish teacher. I remember in Spanish class, I was so lost in terms of what I wanted to do in my major. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to work with people and help
Yeah.
people, especially people with special needs. Um, so I remember it was junior in college, and she told me about speech pathology because it was this scholarship program that people could apply to. And I was like, what is this? What is she talking about? So long story short, I loved it. I ended up applying into the program. So I stayed an extra year in college to finish off my prerequisites to go to graduate school. Then in between graduate school and college, I took a year off. I lived in Spain for a year, and then I went to school in Connecticut and I got my degree in speech pathology, which then ended up being a degree where you could help people with their accents. Like, I didn't know you could do that as a speech
Yeah.
pathologist until I went to school for it.
I didn't
And I
know
was like,
until I met
wow.
you.
Yeah. I had no idea. So I was like, wow, like this comes like full circle for me, because it's kind of like I was meant to do this.
Totally.
Yeah. So now I have my podcast, the Accent of the World podcast. I'm still working as a speech language pathologist, but at work, I mostly work with feeding with babies and younger kids.
Oh, wow.
But I do accent coaching as part of my profession, and based on my, me growing up, I do that in my business.
Amazing. That is such a beautiful story. I thought,
Oh,
as I have an
okay.
accent myself, that people with accent just had to suffer. Because,
You're so
I
funny.
never thought that you could improve your accent apart from practicing every day, and from, going and living in a particular country, that you're speaking.
Right.
I lived in different countries and I learned different language. And it wasn't until, for example, English, that I lived in England that my English started really improving, and I still have an accent. And then I moved to
Mm-hmm.
New Zealand, they spoke with a completely different accent. And then I
Yeah.
now live in Australia and they speak with a completely different accent.
Well,
So,
but that's what makes you unique.
yeah.
And I love your accent. It's like a mishmash of different accents. It's great.
And I think that for me, coming from a recruitment background, that's what I used to do in my corporate job. I saw so many people that could do with some help, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you first
Mm-hmm.
arrive in the country. And, I was one of them. And
Yeah.
I never thought that, these people could reach out to get help
Yeah.
because, when you come to a new country, it's hard for us to think that other people have to get used to our accent because they are living their own world in their own life in their own country. And it's hard for us to sometimes accept that we need to make more of an effort to adapt ourselves and to integrate. And part
Yeah.
of it, I feel, it is a lot to do with the language.
Yeah. It definitely is. Because you have to use language and talk to people essentially everywhere you go. Now, even though we're staying a lot more at home, we're still talking to people all the time. We
Yeah.
have to communicate to survive, to go to work, to buy things.
Yeah.
Even on like online shopping, if you're not talking, you're writing something.
Yeah.
Language is such a huge part of our lives.
And I felt that at some point, I lived in Spain and I spoke Spanish, and I lived in Belgium and I learned French, and I lived in England. Learning how to speak it is one thing, but learning how to explain how you feel,
Hmm.
if you start going deeper, and how you, what your thoughts are, what you believe in, and who you are. It's another step further, I think, when you're learning
Yeah.
a language as well.
Absolutely. It is. It's kind of the cultural aspect of the language, because you can learn enough to survive, to communicate, but like you said, to get into a deeper conversation, there's so much more that you need to know. There's so much more that you need to do, and you really need to expand your knowledge. And there's more to it because when you're trying to express emotions, you also need to use appropriate intonation and stress, which varies from language to language. So there's so much to consider when it comes to that.
Definitely. Now, as we're talking about, this, expressing our emotions and talking about our emotions, I remember that, at some point, I think probably was when I was living in Belgium, I thought to myself, it's hard for me to explain to my Belgian friends who I am really, like what I really feel and what I really believe, in a way that is not going to come across, you know, too black and white, or too strong, or too this or too that. And and part of that whole thing, it makes you feel that you don't fit in. It makes you feel that you are lonely. It makes question your journey as an immigrant. And and it can get you down this spiral of not being very happy. I don't know if
Mhm.
you have gone through that, but I just, wanted to start touching a little bit of when you decided to go through your inner child traumas. When
Mm.
on the stuff that you had gone through probably was quite traumatic, moving at 15 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. I honestly started to look within myself once I discovered spirituality, once I discovered the concept of, emotional intelligence, and being able to look at my life from kind of like a different angle. Because growing up, I didn't realize until I actually went to a therapist how much trauma, um, or how traumatic it was for my parents to keep on leaving. Because when I was born, I didn't meet my dad until I was about a year old
Oh,
because
wow.
he was in the States working. So, as a child, even though you're a little baby, you still know. You feel the energy, you know what's going on. You feel the energy of your mother, you feel the stress. You know something's missing, you know something's not right. And then my dad, initially for the first few years of my life, he kept on going because he needed to make money to survive. He needed to make money to provide for us. And back then I just didn't understand it. A child doesn't understand that, right? A child just understands like, my dad is leaving, he doesn't love me. So it's kind of what you internalize, and those are the beliefs that you adapt, and the blocks that you really, that kind of manifest at that point. And then my mom also started to go. So they started to kind of switch, and she would go and then he would go. And it wasn't that they were gone for a month. They were used to go for 6 months at a time. So it's like half a year. So it was a really long time. And it happened, up until we moved. So I was almost 15. So those were the years in my life that were, shaping me to be who I am today as a child up until 14 years old. So, and my family, even though they meant well, they wanted to provide for me and they were always loving. They weren't big on talking about emotions. So there was nothing I can do, really to get those feelings or these emotions out of me, because I didn't know how to talk about them. And I didn't know how to ask for help, because when I was upset and I would cry, they would tell me not to be sensitive. They would tell me to just, this happens all the time. Like, why are you acting like this? So for a child, I felt like I kept on, I started to put up walls around me because I just didn't understand how to better, express myself. And then, that led me to get into a really bad and abusive relationship when I was in high school, well into college. And I feel like because of these patterns, there was so much going on. And then that pain caused from that relationship, it honestly made my walls go up so much that even though I had friends and I had really good relationships and a lot of love to give and share, but I felt like I couldn't be myself. I couldn't express myself, for the longest time. It took years. So the first thing I remember, so I read a book that was called Many Lives, Many Masters, by Brian Weiss. And then that was kind of like my introduction into the spiritual world. Spiritual means, just self-love, essentially. So my sister has been kind of studying it for so many more years than I have. And she always like tried to get me into it. And then I was never ready. But then once I read the book by myself, and I read it because of our recommendations from a friend from work. So I read it and I was like, wow, okay. So there's something more to it. There's, you can actually, something kind of opened up in me. And then I remember I did EFT. So tapping. My sister, I did it with her. And that was like the first time I admitted like what happened to me. And I feel like that's when I started to chip away at my wall. And it was a lot of work after that and I'm still working on it, but it kind of let me free out of my jail. It was incredible.
Yes, that is such a beautiful way to put it. And I think that when people talk, think about trauma, they think about, things that come to our minds are things like, sexual abuse when you're a kid, or, or domestic violence when we were a kid. And it needs to be something big, but we don't realize that most of us, and I've been studying a Bachelor of Natural Medicine and studying, how trauma can affect us, and not only trauma, like, sexual abuse as a kid or the things that we think are trauma, but how things like even the birth, like what you've just said, I was just reading yesterday, what happened in the birth, with the parents together, while you're in your mom's belly, she knew that your dad wasn't going to be there. She knew that your dad wasn't going to be there for a long time. All of that is affecting us at a genetic level.
Yes.
And it's imprinting that, those emotions on us. And sometimes, and most of the time, it's not until something happens in our life that we don't start uncovering those.
Absolutely.
And would you say that for you was when you had that relationship that you just kind of reached a point that you said, I can't deal with being like this anymore, even with, now knowing?
When I was in that relationship, I didn't discover this about myself until way later.
Wow.
I felt like when these things were happening and I was attracting all these things for my relationship, because essentially I was, because of my past, you know, this feeling of not being loved and low
Yeah.
self-worth. Um, I thought it was my fault. Like, and it's so cliche to say because a lot of victims of, violence and physical and emotional abuse, they think it's their fault.
Yeah.
Um, because they just it's hard to explain, but essentially you just blame it on yourself because you kind of want the other person to love you because you're kind of putting yourself through it because you're so hungry for love.
Yeah.
And then you excuse them and whatnot, and you hope that they don't leave you because if they leave you, you are a total failure, it seems like. And obviously, it's not every relationship, but in my case, it's just if I'm trying to analyze what happened, like if I let him leave, like my parents kept on leaving me, like, I'm totally unlovable.
Yes.
So I feel like that was the reasoning subconsciously behind what I was doing, even though my parents, they raised me to be an independent and strong woman. And I've
Mm.
always been just like that, except for, when that happened to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I
it,
think
it
you're so
was,
right to talk about that because, um, it's not something that a strong woman, like I said, yourself, would be open to talk about. And it
mm,
happens everywhere. And I think that until we start talking about it, we can't demystify the fact that it can happen with everyone.
it
And
can,
we sit in this
can.
place thinking, that's gonna never gonna happen to me or to my sister or to my, a friend or whatever. But I think it's important, to talk about it and just to really start allowing other people to talk about it so they can heal themselves and understand. Because, like I said, you didn't even know
I had
all of
no
that.
idea. No, I didn't understand my patterns and my emotions and my reasoning until I went to therapy because I
Yeah.
just didn't have the emotional intelligence I needed to understand what happened. Um,
So
yeah,
when
but
you decided to go to therapy, was it were you very unhappy with life, or you just thought after reading this book and you thought, I'm just gonna try?
so the first person I went to see wasn't a therapist because I read this book which talks about past life regressions.
Oh yeah,
I went to get a regression, thinking, okay, well, maybe the reason why I'm so angry or unhappy is because of my past lives. So I was like, okay, so let me try this out. And I went to the hypnotist. She was wonderful. She was so nice. And we did the past life regression, and she walked me through it. And it was pretty profound for me, but I honestly couldn't get into it or I couldn't get hypnotized like some people are able to because she said like my subconscious just wouldn't let me go there because I wasn't ready. um but I after our session she said like I really think you should do inner child work before you even
yeah,
tackle this.
yeah,
And she told me about it and I was like, okay, well, what does this mean? And so that's how I started. And so I went back to her for a few more sessions of just inner child work, and she was the first person who really helped me to talk about what happened, because up to
nice,
this point I have admitted it to my sister but I never did anything to heal. And I remember like sitting on her chair and admitting it and just crying, like
yeah,
bawling, saying, this happened, because I couldn't even get the words out. They were almost like stuck in my throat.
yeah,
But then I felt safe in her, in her office and with her. I trusted her. So it finally came out. And it was almost like I could finally breathe.
yeah,
And then we did a little bit of more inner child work, and then I just got myself into this whole world of books and podcasts and
yeah,
self-help, and I started to go down this rabbit hole of everything you can learn, which is great because I learned a lot, but I still felt like I needed to um, go and seek therapy just to help me through it because I knew there was only so much I could do on my own. Um, And I remember I went to a lecture by Gabby Bernstein in New York
Yeah.
City. Yeah, so she was having a lecture and it really spoke to me. And she talked about EMDR therapy.
Mm.
And then after the lecture, I was like, okay, because she talked about how great it is for trauma. So I was like, all right, well, let me find a therapist. And I did. And I'm still with her up to this day.
Oh, that's awesome. I think
Yeah.
it's beautiful that you're sharing this because, back then, I mean, I am I'm a little older than you, but I think the generation of our parents was still the generation of let's not talk about emotions,
Yeah.
let's just, suck it up, keep going.
Yeah.
Life is tough. There is no time for crying or talking about anything, everything goes under the carpet. And we are these beings
Yeah.
this day, obviously, as a parent nowadays, there is so many books out there that talks about a completely different way of raising kids in these days that but I also feel that the reality is we don't know how that's going to impact this generation either. So our parents did the best that they could, and we are also doing the best that we can. But we, I think, suffer from some the consequences of never being able to speak about emotions, never allowing ourselves to feel the emotion or to acknowledge whatever we're feeling. But I think that is still, the majority of people, they think they need to be tough and keep going, and they need to keep carrying their pain because their pain are not considered too
Yeah.
big.
Yeah.
They're not considered like a trauma. They are not considered. And I think this is why it's so beautiful, like, if you were to talk to somebody today that, is not feeling, very happy, or like I said, angry, I spent many years in my life angry, what would you
Hmm.
say to them, for them to start going on this path of healing?
Yeah. It's really, there's so much that they can discover about themselves and unblocking your negative beliefs because we all form these beliefs based on what happened to us. And it could be, like you said, trauma doesn't have to mean somebody was sexually abused. It doesn't have to be a huge event. It could be you doing an art project and your mom saying, like, oh, you didn't do very well, try it again. And then you kind of, you might take that as a child because you're so innocent, as in, oh, I'm a terrible artist, I could never do art. And then you kind of go through life with this belief that formed during this innocent time, and then it impacts the way that you live now. So I think it is worth it for us to explore that subconscious, because it could really change our life if we are able to look back and heal these instances, because it's very rare that somebody had a perfect childhood. It's
Yeah.
almost impossible. So we all go through life with these negative beliefs and that really block us. And we don't even realize how much they manifest. You might think like, oh, I'm angry all the time. Like, why are you angry all the time? You're
Yeah.
not an angry person. You weren't born angry. So you
Yeah.
should really discover, where is this coming from? And it doesn't mean you have to go to a therapist and spend $500 a session. It's
Yeah.
not like that. You could read books on self-help that can already help you so much to like open up your mind as to what's happening. There's free podcasts you can listen to. There's so much out there that you
Mm.
can do that is really easy and tangible. You can do it without, if you're not ready to talk to somebody. Although
Yeah.
I do think every person should have a therapist. That's my
Yeah,
thing.
I think that it's also important on this healing journey to acknowledge what you can do by yourself and to
Yeah.
reach out for help when you can't.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
some of it, once you start really understanding what has happened to you, some of it is it's difficult for us to process on our own. And
Yeah.
I think that, that's when a therapist, a psychologist, or, it's really important, plays a really important
Yes.
role to help us to get there.
Absolutely.
Think about, like, your life now and how you feel like about yourself and, your life and what you're accomplishing. Could you have done that without your, inner healing journey?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I still have a very long way to go because I think we're all still learning and healing
Yeah.
throughout our lives. But there is absolutely no way I would have a podcast if I didn't.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely none. Because if I didn't, I would still believe that I'm not worthy of anything. I would still believe that I'm totally not lovable, that everybody would hate me, that I'm not good as anybody else. Like, I'm worse than. That was the messaging I had in my head for
Yeah.
years and years without knowing it, right?
Yes.
That could manifest as jealousy. It can manifest as pain. It can manifest in so many different ways. And then you have these feelings and you're like, oh, I'm a bad person. But you're not a bad person. It's just there's so much healing you still need to do and you need to access. But there's absolutely no way that I would be able to start my own business or do anything that wasn't kind of aligned what I was supposed to do, because my career, I'm very grateful for it as a speech pathologist.
Mm.
But I do believe, I want to focus more on my business moving forward. And I don't think I wouldn't be brave enough
Yes.
to do it if I didn't go through this
That's amazing.
process.
That's amazing. So, and in regards to, how much, you have connected to yourself and, like, and really, um, like this whole self-love journey that you have been as well, how would you say that, what were the benefits of going through this inner healing journey?
There's so much just because I'm able to be a lot more intuitive and look within myself. So now I understand like patterns. If something happens, if I hear something bothers me, I'm able to take a step back and evaluate what's going on and really understand why am I reacting a certain way. And it's really hard for me to kind of get out of control in a way. I'm able to kind of control myself and look at things from different angles, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Um, I still get very stressed sometimes, I still do. And I still struggle with time. I think that's my biggest challenge, where I feel like I'm always out of time. So in the morning, I wake up and instead of taking, like, 20 minutes or something to just meditate and sit back and get ready for my day, sometimes I'm like, okay, I have so much to do. And then I just get
Yeah.
into it. And then it stresses me out. So this is something that I'm currently working on. So
Yeah.
today I'm trying to have like an hour when I wake up, because I don't have kids yet, an hour when I wake up, where I'm able to focus just on me and do what I want. So today I worked out, I meditated, I took a nice shower. It was great. And I think it
Yeah.
makes a big difference, because you can definitely still sabotage yourself even as you're going through this process, and you still might feel guilty for, especially as a woman, that you take this time to do self-love activities when you
Yeah.
should be doing other things. So there's still a lot going on in my head. But once I do give myself the time and permission to focus on myself, it's incredible. It makes such a big difference.
And I think, like I said, we are all a work in progress, right? We can't,
Yeah.
and I think that's the beautiful thing, it's a journey, it's a process, we keep working on this area of our lives, on that area, and we just keep evolving as human beings. And that's, there is no end on this journey, right? Like, it's just a ever evolving journey that I think it's, which is beautiful. But
Yeah.
I am so pleased that you have done all the work on yourself and that you're doing the work that you're doing, because like I said, I had never come across. And so talk to us a little bit more about how you can help, the immigrant community as well.
Absolutely. So I think that having an accent is incredible because it's part of who you are. It helps you tell your story. But it gets problematic when you are not understood and you're frustrated, when it gets in the way of you putting yourself out there and pursuing opportunities or pursuing career goals that you might have or higher up positions, because a lot of us have low confidence when we have an accent, right?
Yeah.
That's really the direct, um, I would say, or like the negative about having an accent, the negative aspect of having an accent is that low confidence or this feeling of being judged, right? So I would say to the immigrant community, you don't have to feel this way, because there's so much you can do in order to be a good communicator and be a have the confidence to speak your mind and show up as yourself. So I do that. I help people do that through my content that I put out. I put out a lot of free content on social media. I do private coaching, and then I have an online program that helps you essentially, just work on your accent wherever you need to, and also work on your confidence, because I think a lot of it is mindset.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And that totally resonates now when you can't, I always remember at the beginning when I first, moved from Brazil to, a different country, when you start talking, people, you can see on their faces, they don't understand you. That is just so destroying, like
Mm-hmm.
it's so
Mm-hmm.
stressful for us, and it's so it hurts your soul, because you're
It
like, I'm really
does.
trying my best here, but yet the other person can't understand me. And sometimes, yeah, we'll shy away from doing what we want to do, and shy away from being who we want to be. And like, the work that you're doing is amazing, because we don't have to do that.
You really don't. And it's kills me a little bit, because a lot of the immigrants who move to other countries, a lot of them come with college degrees and master's
Yeah.
degrees. There are doctors who move, lawyers who move, but then unfortunately can't practice unless they, recertify themselves or do something that, in order to be able to practice. But a lot of times their English gets in the way as well. But then people are portrayed, because they have an accent, as being less intelligent. And those are people who speak multiple languages, who do so much. And it's just, such a disadvantage, where you're not able to express yourself the way that you would like to.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
there's so much that you can do in order
That's
to,
beautiful.
fix that.
People can find you on Facebook, Instagram. You've got a YouTube channel. I'll put all the details below. Obviously, your podcast. You
Yes, my
can send
podcast.
you,
Hmm. My
stories.
website too. Yeah. It's
Yes,
my pleasure. Absolutely. If you can link that so anybody could find me. I'm most active on Instagram. Um, and I have a podcast episode that comes out every week.
awesome. Perfect. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for being here with me, Lena. It's been absolutely great pleasure. And keep doing
Oh,
the amazing work that you're doing. I love it.
thank you so much. You're so kind. And thank you for letting me, open up and talk about my experiences on your show. I appreciate it, because I think it is hard to talk about it. Although I think if I can help even one person to feel like they're not alone, it makes such a big difference,
Yeah.
you know?
And I
So
think
I'm
that we learn
glad.
so much from each other, definitely. And for me, since I have been on my own inner healing journey, I feel that we all have so much potential if we want to go there, if we want to really heal our traumas and our pain. And so we can, take all those walls off, because we all keep
Yeah,
building those walls around us to protect us. And in
we
reality, it
do.
would be just as simple as just work it out the way to take those walls off and just become who we want to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And everybody gets there in a different way, but it's so, so worth it to work at it. It's
Yeah,
hard, it's uncomfortable, it takes a long time, but it's so worth
worth
it.
it. That's
So worth
awesome.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's all people need to hear. It's worth it.
It's worth it, 100%. I can't even imagine if I was still the same closed up girl or woman that I was a few years ago. I wouldn't. I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
be me. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And yes, take care. And I will add all your details. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.